You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, the DOJ has issued a letter to Jim Jordan informing him that it won't be handing over documents relating to the ongoing investigation into Joe Biden's handling of classified documents. Now, you'd mentioned on a previous episode that we had that there was no way that this would happen, so you were on the mark on that one. Why did the Justice Department ultimately come back and say no?
Yeah, the Justice Department, I think, appropriately said to Jim Jordan, listen, we have an ongoing potential criminal probe. Not only that, we have a special counsel. Once a special counsel is appointed, there are some special rules and procedures that kick in. And in part, they're designed to protect the integrity and secrecy of the special counsel probe. But in essence, the same principle holds true with any ongoing criminal investigation. And that is the Department of Justice holds its investigative cards very close to the vest. And frankly, the last thing they want to do is start turning over the details of an ongoing criminal investigation to members of Congress, because at that point, you really can't guarantee or ensure the integrity of the investigation. You can't ensure that things won't be able or won't start to leak out through members of Congress or through their staff. And, I know members of Congress will say, no, well, we have security clearances, we can be trusted, says some of the insurrectionists who are currently serving in Congress. So I'm not wildly persuaded that they are all trustworthy. But I think the Department of Justice in this instance sent a letter to Jim Jordan saying, thank you for your request and your interest and your desire to perform oversight, but we're going to preserve the integrity of the ongoing investigation.
Now, what was Jim Jordan looking to actually do with these documents?
Well, that's anybody's guess because it's Jim Jordan, right? This was the guy who couldn't answer the question when asked, did you talk to Donald Trump on the morning of the insurrection? Yeah. He did the whole humming, I can't remember, I don't know, I can't. And then it was learned thereafter that his own phone calls, his own phone records showed that he talked to Donald Trump for a full 10 minutes. I'm sorry, Jim Jordan is not to be trusted. So what did he want to do? Well, in a normal world, applying the sort of normal rules of congressional convention, he wants to perform oversight, which is part of the responsibility of the legislative branch to see if, for example, there's any misconduct going on at the Department of Justice, or to see whether there is perhaps the need for legislation in connection with this whole classified documents debacle. I find it extremely telling that Jim Jordan apparently isn't interested in the documents crimes Donald Trump committed, or in the classified documents, let's call them missteps that Mike Pence committed, which seem more closely aligned with the missteps that Joe Biden committed. Probably no crimes there by either of those two men. But doesn't that sort of tell you everything you need to know about Jim Jordan's intent, his goal, his mission? It's to, let's call it what it is, try to find ways to dirty up Joe Biden and exploit that information to Jordan and the Republicans' political advantage. Call me cynical, but that's my take.
Isn't the point of these congressional probes ultimately to just inform the Justice Department? Like, the point of the January 6th committee, at least in part, was to decide whether or not they would ultimately send a criminal referral to the DOJ. They ultimately did make that decision to send a criminal referral to the DOJ against Donald Trump. But if the DOJ is already handling this issue of Biden's handling of classified documents, what would the point of this cooperation be, other than, of course, for Jim Jordan to just turn this into a circus?
Yeah, it's for the political advantage of the Republicans and the political disadvantage of Joe Biden and the Democrats writ large, at least in my opinion. But even the J6 committee, primarily, it had to have a legislative purpose in conducting the J6 hearings that the committee conducted. And that was an issue that was litigated in court. People that were resisting the J6 committee's subpoenas went in and said, wait a minute, this is really Congress trying to co-opt the sort of criminal jurisdiction of the Department of Justice, and therefore we shouldn't have to comply with these subpoenas. And the J6 committee defended, rightfully so in my opinion, and more importantly, in the opinion of the judges who had to rule on this issue, they defended by saying, no, we have a legislative purpose. we need to think long and hard about what kind of legislation we can put in place so that no future president can ever try to overthrow our democracy or can ever try to stop the peaceful transfer of power or the count of the electoral college votes. Secondarily, their reason was, we need to see if there are any criminal referrals that are appropriate that come out of this legislative investigation we're conducting. So ordinarily, the legislative purpose is kind of the main reason you conduct them. And the fact that you might find evidence of crime and then you might then refer that crime to the Department of Justice for further investigation and prosecution is supposed to be a secondary goal of a congressional inquiry.
And of course, that's not the case here. The whole point is to try and sink Joe Biden. Just to humor the Jim Jordans of the world for a second, what would the possible point of looking into Joe Biden's handling of these documents, but not Trump's, not Pence? Like in what world would that be appropriate? What's the rationale that Jim Jordan is trying to surface here for choosing to focus all of these resources against Biden, but not Donald Trump, who did something to an extent that was like 10 times worse in terms of the number of documents, and also, not to mention, withholding them, unlawfully retaining these documents afterwards, and then obstructing efforts by the DOJ to actually get them back? Or Mike Pence, who pretty much did the same thing as Joe Biden in terms of having them and then immediately contacting the National Archives to get them back.
I hate to put on my Jim Jordan hat because, I don't know what I might catch. I would certainly have to scrub my scalp once I took it off. But here is, if I'm going to make the Jim Jordan argument, here's how it would go. Congress has constitutional oversight authority of the executive branch, right? They can and they always do conduct oversight hearings to try to be a check and balance on potential executive branch overreach or abuse. So Joe Biden is the president. And so he is the head of the executive branch. And because Congress has that oversight responsibility over the executive branch, he could certainly say, that's what we're doing. We want to make sure whatever it is that caused the president of the United States in his former capacity to have classified documents, we want to put some safeguards in place, perhaps even some legislation with respect to how classified materials must be handled legally, not just by practice or custom. And, Mike Pence is no longer part of the executive branch. Donald Trump is no longer part of the executive branch. So our oversight authority extends to Joe Biden at this moment. Again, I'm taking the hat off and I need to go like this. I don't buy what I just said, but I think that's how Jim Jordan would spin it if he were ever inclined to answer a direct question, which anytime you see him interviewed is not something he's inclined to do.
But wouldn't this not apply because all of this happened while Joe Biden was vice president? That administration is done. So isn't there some type of a cutoff where even though it's the same person, that was him in his capacity as VP, this is him in his capacity as president, they're not the same for all intents and purposes?
You just eloquently and succinctly cut down the argument I tried to make when I had my Jim Jordan hat on. You're exactly right. Because, apparently, based on the reporting, Joe Biden came into possession of these documents in his prior government service. Now, he did retain them through the time he was president, but you're right. I think the more appropriate question and inquiry and oversight mission would be, how was it that he left government and hung on to them? But if that was really the question the Republican committee wanted to get at, then you got to ask the same questions of Pence and of Trump. And of course, they have no interest in that.
And we'll finish off with this. I know that you stick with the legal stuff usually, but this is a political question. Do you think that it's smart for these Republicans to continue harping on this issue of stolen documents, given that we know that what Biden did was relatively harmless and that what Trump did was not, given, again, the amount of documents that he had and the extent to which he tried to hang on to them, lied to the DOJ, submitted false attestations from his lawyers saying that he had already returned documents that he hadn't. So do you think this is a smart issue for Republicans to keep at the forefront, given the disparity in the responses between Biden and Trump?
I mean, I'm not a political expert or analyst, but, the way I see it in the Trump years and beyond, to this day, the Republican Party seems entirely happy to, become extinct by following in the same path, continuing to make the same bad decisions that we all see have hurt them. That it's hurt them politically. It certainly hurt them in the eyes of the voting public. And yet they don't seem to want to alter. Of course, it does feel to me like at some point the Republican Party is going to implode, and it's just a question of who's going to rise up from those ashes. I think people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are positioning themselves to be, some of those phoenixes that rise up from the ashes and take control and try to restore some sense of sanity and decency to the Republican Party. But, the end is as of yet unwritten.
Yeah, I think personally, I believe that train has already left the station. I don't think it's going to be like one of those zombie movies where all of a sudden, the main zombie gets killed and then everybody else who is infected just snaps out of it like that. I think that, a lot of this party is just too far gone. And look, I think to your point before, in terms of the Republican Party basically committing political suicide, this is what happens when you don't use the opportunity after losing to do that postmortem, to retool, to figure out how you lost and how you're going to fix those things, change it, and win the next time, because they just went forward and pretended that they won an election that they lost and didn't look at the issues underlying that loss and why people voted against Donald Trump and the Republican Party, because they deprived themselves of that opportunity to retool. Well, that's exactly why they're going to keep losing moving forward, because they'll have the support of their base and of those people who want them to pretend that they won an election that they lost. But otherwise, there's a lot of people out there who were very clearly upset with the way that the country was going under Donald Trump, under these Republicans. And because they changed nothing, but actually went further off the cliff in the direction of, these lunatic election deniers and whatnot, because they went further in that direction, that's only going to continue to alienate the very people whose support they needed if they wanted to have won that last election. So this problem will continue getting worse. And, far be it from me to interrupt our enemy while they're making a mistake. But it really does blow my mind how they can't see something that is so obvious that it's hurting themselves. So,
and to the extent there's any good news, I don't think the House of Representatives accomplishes anything in the next 2 years, certainly not anything that's going to make it through the Senate. And even with Jim Jordan, who is, tilting at this windmill, like he's going to get the Department of Justice to divulge the details of ongoing investigations, this is a loser for Jim Jordan, because at the end of the day, if he really wants to push enforcing these subpoenas, I'm quite sure the Department of Justice will resist. There will be a legal challenge in court, and the Department of Justice will win every day of the week. So this is little more than Jim Jordan making noise, but ultimately, I think it will be to no avail.
Yeah. Well, with that said, we're happy to watch Jim Jordan continue to step on rakes and hit himself in the face. So with that said, Glenn, thank you for the update here. If anybody watching wants to continue to stay up on legal news, make sure to follow both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.